I'm Camilla, 31, a woman, and my entire future was shattered on a Tuesday evening when I discovered my fiancé was cheating on me. When I confronted him, he tried to dismiss it all with 5 little words. It was just emotional. My response wasn't to scream or to cry, but to do something he never saw coming. I told his father. Now my ex-fiancé, Leo, is disowned, and his parents, the people who were supposed to become my in-laws, still call me their favorite. Our life, Leo's and mine, had been meticulously planned. As a structural engineer, I'm a person who believes in blueprints, in solid foundations, and in building things to last. Leo, a charismatic and handsome social media manager, was supposed to be the keystone in the arch of my life. We had a beautiful home with a garden I was deeply proud of, a wedding date circled on the calendar, and the unwavering approval of his wonderful parents, Robert and Helen. In many ways, my relationship with them was as foundational to our future as my relationship with their son. Robert was a man carved from granite and principle. A self-made owner of a large construction business, he saw a kindred spirit in me. He appreciated my methodical approach to problems and my belief in hard work. Helen, a retired school teacher, was the heart of the family, warm, intelligent, and nurturing. From our very first meeting, they welcomed me not as a guest, but as a daughter they had been waiting for. It was a stark contrast to how they often treated Leo. They loved him, of course, but their love was frequently laced with a thread of weary exasperation. This dynamic was never clearer than during the investment incident last year. Leo came home one evening, practically vibrating with excitement over a can't-miss cryptocurrency opportunity a friend had told him about. He wanted to pull a significant amount from our joint wedding savings to invest. I spent 2 hours calmly walking him through a risk analysis, showing him the volatility and the lack of any real security. He pouted, accusing me of being a pessimist who didn't believe in him. He ended up using his personal savings, and, predictably, the investment vanished into thin air within a month. At Sunday dinner the following week, Leo was quiet and sullen. When Robert asked why, Leo mumbled something about a small financial setback. I kept quiet, not wanting to embarrass him, but Robert pressed. Eventually, the whole story came out. Robert didn't yell. He just slowly put down his fork, looked at his son, and then looked at me. "Camilla offered you sound advice, and you ignored it," he said, his voice level and firm. "She has a good head on her shoulders, Leo. You're almost 30. It's past time you started acting like you have one, too." Helen reached across the table and patted my hand. "We're so glad he has you to keep him grounded, dear," she said softly. Leo just stared at his plate, his ears red with shame. I felt a pang of pity for him, but also a swell of pride. I was the responsible one, the stable one. I was the one they trusted. Another time, we were all gathered in their living room when a news segment about a local zoning dispute came on. Leo, who skimmed headlines for a living, immediately launched into a passionate but ill-informed opinion. I, having actually worked on a similar municipal project, gently corrected a few of his points, citing specific regulations and engineering challenges. The conversation turned into a friendly debate. Leo grew flustered, his arguments becoming more about emotion than fact. Finally, Robert held up a hand. "All right, son, you've made your point," he said before turning to me with a smile. "And Camilla has made a case. See the difference? Logic, facts, structure. That's how you win an argument. That's how you build something that stands." The subtext was clear. I built things that last. Leo built castles in the air. The most telling moment, however, came on my 31st birthday. We were at their house for a small celebration. After we ate, Helen disappeared for a moment and came back with a small, velvet-covered box. Inside was a beautiful antique locket. "This was my mother's," Helen said, her eyes misty. "She gave it to me on my wedding day. Robert and I want you to have it." I was speechless. It was a true family heirloom. Leo, standing beside me, looked genuinely shocked. "Mom, I thought you were saving that for," he trailed off, but we all knew what he meant. For his future wife, yes, but he assumed that meant after they were officially married, or perhaps that he would be the one to present it. Helen just smiled at me, her gaze bypassing her own son. "Camilla is already family," she said simply. "She embodies the values this family holds dear: integrity, strength, and loyalty." Loyalty. That word echoed in my mind as I looked at the locket, a symbol of a bond I cherished. I was their favorite. It was our running joke, a line Robert would use with a wink when I'd take his Sid. E in a debate over football, or when I'd bring Helen her favorite type of flowers. See, Leo, this is why Camilla is our favorite. We'd all laugh, but there was a truth to it that hummed just beneath the surface. They saw in me the stability they wished for in their son. I saw in them the loving, principled family I'd always wanted. I thought that by marrying Leo, I was simply formalizing that bond. I had no idea that the foundation I was standing on was about to crumble, and that the only thing left standing would be the very family I thought I was joining. The evening it all fell apart was aggressively, painfully normal. It was a Tuesday. We had tacos for dinner. Leo was on the couch, scrolling through his phone with that focused intensity he reserved for work, a slight smile playing on his lips. I was in the kitchen, packing leftovers for my lunch the next day, the comforting scent of cumin and lime still hanging in the air. The television was murmuring in the background. It was a perfect picture of domestic tranquility, a snapshot of the life we had built. "Hey, I'm just going to run a quick bath," I said, wiping down the counter. "Okay, babe," he answered, his eyes never leaving his screen. I went upstairs, started the water, and added some lavender bath salts, looking forward to a long soak. As I was about to undress, I realized I'd left my book downstairs. I padded back down the carpeted stairs, my footsteps silent. As I entered the living room, I saw that Leo had fallen asleep on the couch, his head lolled to one side, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His phone had slipped from his hand and landed screen up on the cushion beside him. Normally, I would have just picked it up, plugged it in on the nightstand, and thought nothing of it. Leo and I had an open phone policy, not because of suspicion, but because we had nothing to hide. Or so I believed. We knew each other's passcodes for emergencies, for queuing up a song in the car, or for looking up a recipe when one of us had messy hands. It was a symbol of our complete trust. As I reached for the phone, the screen lit up with a new message notification. It was from a name I recognized, Juliana, a freelance graphic designer Leo's agency worked with frequently. I'd met her once or twice at company parties. She was bubbly, artistic, and seemed to hang on Leo's every word. The preview of the message was just a single line. "Juliana, thinking of you, can't wait to talk tomorrow. X." An X, a kiss. My mind snagged on it. It wasn't a blatant declaration of anything, but it was intimate. It was a sign-off I used with my sister or my closest friends, not a professional colleague. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably nothing, a cultural difference, maybe. People in creative fields were more expressive. I was a practical engineer. I dealt in absolutes. This was just a bit of friendly fluff. But the knot didn't dissolve. It tightened. My heart started beating a little faster. "Just check," a small voice whispered in my head, "you have nothing to hide from each other. If it's nothing, you'll feel silly for a second and then you can take your bath." With a trembling hand, I picked up the phone. Leo didn't stir. I swiped up and put in his passcode, his birthday, the same 4 digits for years. The message app was already open. The conversation with Juliana was right at the top. And as my eyes scanned the screen, the floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. It wasn't just one message. It was a flood. Dozens upon dozens of them, stretching back weeks, maybe months. This wasn't a professional correspondence peppered with a few friendly asides. This was a secret, hidden world. My breath caught in my chest. I sank onto the armchair opposite the couch, the phone held tightly in my hands, my bath completely forgotten. I started reading. "Leo, I'm stuck in another one of those family dinners. I swear, my dad respects Camilla more than he respects me. Juliana, he just doesn't see the real you. The brilliant, creative soul. He only sees what she wants him to see. Leo, you get me, you always do. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part. The stable fiancé. Juliana, you're not meant to be stable. You're meant to be spectacular. You deserve someone who sees that." My hands started to shake. They were talking about me, dissecting me, my relationship with his parents, my very character. Juliana was feeding his insecurities, painting me as some kind of controlling villain, and he was soaking it up. I scrolled further, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. Juliana saw the new mock-ups for the wedding invites. They're nice, very traditional, very Camilla. Leo, don't remind me. I wanted something more modern, more us. But you know, it's easier not to fight it. Juliana, what would us look like? Leo, it would look like that cafe in Paris you told me about. Sunlight, art, freedom, not. Beige napkins. Beige napkins? I had spent an entire afternoon looking at fabric swatches with him. He said he loved the beige. He said it was classic and elegant. It was a lie, all of it. The worst of it came near the end of the visible thread. The messages became more personal, more deeply emotional. They shared private jokes, hopes for the future, and intimate thoughts that a man should only ever share with the person he intends to spend his life with. Juliana, sometimes I just want to run away with you. Leo, don't say that unless you mean it. My heart can't take it. Juliana, I mean it. I think about it all the time. Our little studio, filled with music and paint. Leo, it sounds like heaven, a world away from all this. He was building a fantasy life with her. A life where I didn't exist. He wasn't just complaining about me. He was actively designing a future that excluded me, with my ring on his finger and our joint account funding the very phone he was using to betray me. The word love wasn't there. There were no explicit details of physical meetings, but in a way, this was so much worse. This was an affair of the soul. He had taken the most sacred, intimate parts of himself, the parts I thought were reserved for me, and he had given them to someone else. He had let another woman into the private garden of our relationship, and together, they had salted the earth. I sat there in the silent living room for what felt like hours, the only light coming from the phone screen illuminating the profound ugliness of his betrayal. The cold knot in my stomach had grown into a block of ice. The picture of domestic tranquility was shattered, and all I could see were the jagged, irreparable pieces. I don't know how long I sat in that armchair, staring at the screen. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing around the singular, agonizing reality of the text messages. Eventually, the first rays of dawn began to filter through the windows, casting long, gray shadows across the room. Leo was still asleep, blissfully unaware that our world had ended while he dreamt. My grief had passed through its initial, fiery stage and settled into something cold and hard. I was a structure that had been compromised. The facade was still standing, but the internal supports had been corroded, eaten away from the inside. I knew a confrontation was inevitable. I also knew that if I started screaming, I might never stop. I needed to approach this like I would any engineering problem, with precision, with evidence, and with an unshakable resolve. I made a pot of coffee, the familiar, mundane ritual a bizarre counterpoint to the turmoil in my chest. The aroma filled the kitchen, a scent of normalcy that felt like a cruel joke. I poured 2 mugs, one for me, one for him. When he finally stirred, I was sitting at the kitchen table, his phone placed squarely in the center, screen dark. He shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Morning," he mumbled, reaching for the mug I'd set out for him. "Did you sleep okay? I must have passed out on the couch." "We need to talk, Leo," I said. My voice was eerily calm, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. He stopped, his hand hovering over the coffee mug. He looked at me, then at his phone on the table, and a flicker of something fear, recognition crossed his face. He knew. "Okay," he said slowly, pulling out a chair and sitting down opposite me. "What's wrong?" I didn't answer right away. I just pushed his phone across the table towards him. "Juliana," I said, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. "She seems to be thinking of you a lot." The color drained from his face. He looked from the phone to me, his eyes wide with panic. "Cammy, what are you talking about? Did you go through my phone?" There it was, the first volley, deflection. "Your phone was on the cushion, screen up," I stated flatly. "A message came through, I saw it, and then I saw the rest." He fumbled for the phone, his hands shaking as he unlocked it. He didn't need to read much. He knew what was in there. I watched as his expression shifted from panic to a sort of defensive indignation. He was already building his walls. "Look, it's not what you think," he started, his voice gaining a desperate, pleading edge. "We're just friends. She's a colleague. We vent to each other. It's nothing." "Nothing," I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "You told her you felt like you were playing a part with me. You designed a fantasy life with her in Paris. You told her the thought of running away with her sounded like heaven. You let her insult our wedding invitations, our home, our life. Does that sound like nothing to you, Leo?" He flinched at every quoted phrase, a clear sign that he remembered every word. "You don't understand the context," he stammered, running a hand through his hair. "It's just talk. Creative people, we're more expressive. It doesn't mean anything." "It means everything," I shot back, my composure finally starting to crack. "It means that for months, you have been emotionally betraying me. You've been building a relationship with another woman behind my back. You've been complaining about me, about our life, to her. That is not something friends do." He stood up and started pacing the kitchen, the way he always did when he felt cornered. Okay, maybe I let it go too far, I'm sorry, but nothing happened. I never touched her. I would never, ever physically cheat on you, Cammy. You have to believe me." He came over and tried to take my hands, his eyes welling up with tears. I pulled away as if his touch was electric. And then he said the words. The 5 words that took his betrayal and coated it in a layer of insulting, dismissive poison. "It was just emotional," he cried, his voice breaking. "It didn't mean anything real. It was an escape, a fantasy. It wasn't real life. This," he said, gesturing around our kitchen at me, "this is real life. I chose you." The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. He wasn't just admitting to it. He was minimizing it, framing it as a lesser crime, as if the heart was a less vital organ to wound than the body. He expected me to be relieved. He expected me to hear it wasn't physical and breathe a sigh of relief, to thank him for his restraint, and to accept his apology so we could move on. "Just emotional," I whispered, the words tasting like venom. "Leo, the emotional part is the foundation of everything. It's the trust. It's the intimacy. It's the sacred space that is supposed to be only for us. You didn't just let someone else in, you invited her in and helped her vandalize it. And now you're standing there telling me it's not a big deal because you didn't happen to physically touch her while you did it. That is the most insulting thing you have ever said to me." His tears stopped, his face hardened. "You're overreacting," he said, his voice turning cold. "You invaded my privacy and now you're blowing this completely out of proportion. I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me?" I looked at the man standing in front of me, the man who had held my hand and promised me a future, the man whose family had given me a priceless heirloom as a symbol of my loyalty, and I felt nothing. The love, the warmth, the future I had so carefully designed had all evaporated. All that was left was the cold, hard certainty of a structural failure. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice as solid as steel. "Pack a bag. I want you out of this house. Today." He stared at me, his mouth agape. He truly believed he could talk his way out of it. He believed his betrayal was a minor infraction, a footnote. He had no idea that he hadn't just broken my heart. He had broken the trust of his entire family, and I was about to make sure they knew it. The hours after Leo left were a study in suspended animation. He had thrown some clothes into a duffel bag, his face a mask of wounded pride and disbelief, still muttering about how I was making a huge mistake. The slam of the front door echoed in the sudden, cavernous silence of the house. Our house. Now just my house. The air, once filled with the comfortable hum of our shared life, was now thin and sharp, each breath a reminder of the void he had left. I walked through the rooms, touching the furniture we had picked out together, looking at the photos on the mantelpiece, us smiling on a hike at a friend's wedding at his parents' 40th anniversary party. In every photo, he looked happy. He looked like a man in love. What part of it was real? Was any of it? The questions spiraled in my mind, a vortex of doubt and pain. My first instinct was to call my sister, to dissolve into tears and let her rage on my behalf. But my hand hovered over the phone, and I hesitated. This felt different. This wasn't just a breakup. This was a deeper, more complex betrayal that was tangled up with Robert and Helen. I sat on the edge of the bed, the locket Helen had given me cool against my skin. She embodies the values this family holds dear: integrity, strength, and loyalty. Helen's voice echoed in my memory. Loyalty. The word was a bitter irony now. Leo, their own son, possessed none of it, and I, the outsider they had embraced, felt a crushing sense of responsibility. Could I just let it go? Could I call them and tell them the wedding was off, offering some vague, sanitized excuse like, "We grew apart," or "We want different things"? The thought felt like a lie. It felt like a betrayal of the relationship I had with them. They had made me feel like a daughter. They had invested their trust and their love in me. They had shared their disappointment in their son with me, confiding in me that they hoped my stability would rub off on him. To hide the truth of his character, to protect him after he had so thoroughly shattered me, would be to participate in his deceit. It would make me complicit. Robert was Mo. Ray than just my future father-in-law, he was a mentor. We talked about business, about ethics, about the importance of one's word. He was a man who believed a solid reputation was the most valuable asset a person could have. How could I look him in the eye ever again, knowing that his son had a reputation built on lies, and I had helped to cover it up? This wasn't about revenge. The thought of deliberately hurting Leo further didn't bring me any satisfaction. It just felt hollow. No, this was about truth. It was about honoring the very principles, integrity, and loyalty that they had so admired in me. I owed them the truth, not as Leo's spurned fiancé, but as Camilla, the woman they called family. My relationship with them was real and separate, and it deserved the respect of honesty. With a deep, shaky breath, I made the decision. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This would change everything. It would unleash a storm, and I had no idea where the pieces would land. But it was the only path forward that felt true to who I was. I found Robert's number in my contacts. My thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment. I felt a surge of nausea. Was I really about to detonate a family? Taking one last, fortifying breath, I pressed the button. It rang twice before he picked up. "Camilla, how are you, kiddo?" His voice was warm and cheerful, the way it always was. It made what I was about to do feel 1,000 times harder. "Hi, Robert," I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy to my ears. I'm sorry to bother you." The cheerfulness in his voice vanished instantly, replaced by paternal concern. "What's wrong? You sound upset. Is everything okay? Is Leo all right?" "Leo is fine," I said, the words catching in my throat. "But everything is not okay." I paused, struggling to assemble the right words. "Robert, I have to tell you something, and it's very difficult. The wedding is off." Silence. For a long second, all I could hear was the faint static on the line. "Off," he finally said, his voice low and serious. "What happened? Did you two have a fight?" "It was more than a fight," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "Robert, I can't explain it properly over the phone. I feel like I owe you an explanation, a real one, face to face, out of respect for you and Helen." I could hear the gears turning in his head. He was a man who dealt in facts and foundations, and he knew when one was crumbling. "Of course," he said, his voice now grim. "Where are you? Are you at the house?" "Yes." "Is Leo there?" "No, I asked him to leave." Another pause, this one heavier than the last. "Okay," he said, his voice firm, all business. "Don't go anywhere, I'm on my way." The line went dead. I sank back against the headboard, the phone slipping from my numb fingers. There was no turning back now. I had set the wheels in motion. Whatever happened next, it was no longer just my story to bear alone. The 40 minutes it took for Robert to arrive felt like a lifetime. I tidied the living room on autopilot, pointlessly fluffing cushions and straightening picture frames that were already straight. It was a useless attempt to impose order on a world that had descended into chaos. Every passing car on the street outside made my heart leap into my throat. When the doorbell finally rang, the sound was so sharp and decisive it made me jump. I opened the door to find Robert standing on the porch. He wasn't wearing his usual work polo and jeans. He was in a crisp button-down shirt, looking like he'd come straight from a business meeting. His face was a grim, unreadable mask, his eyes searching mine for answers before he even spoke a word. "Camilla," he said, his voice low. He stepped inside, and I closed the door behind him. He didn't move towards the living room but stood in the entryway, as if crossing the threshold into the heart of our home was a boundary he wasn't sure he should cross. "Thank you for coming," I said quietly. "Can I get you some water, coffee?" He shook his head, his gaze sweeping over the entryway, noting the absence of Leo's shoes by the door, the missing jacket from the coat rack. "Just tell me what happened." I led him to the kitchen table, the scene of the morning's confrontation. We sat in the same chairs, me where I had sat, him where Leo had. The symmetry was not lost on me. I took a deep breath, marshaling my thoughts, determined to present this as factually as possible, without hysterics. "Last night I discovered that Leo has been having an emotional affair with a woman from his work," I began, my voice clear and steady. The practice had paid off. "Her name is Juliana. He's been texting her for months. It wasn't physical as far as I know. But the things they said, the relationship they built, it was a profound betrayal." Robert listened without interruption, his hands clasped on the table in front. Of him, his expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. He was processing, analyzing, assessing the damage. "He was confiding in her about everything," I continued, my voice starting to waver as the memories flooded back. "He complained about me, about you and Helen, about our life together. He talked with her about a future that didn't include me. He built a whole fantasy world with her." I stopped, unable to say more for a moment, the lump in my throat too large to speak around. Robert remained silent, giving me the space to compose myself. His patience felt like a gift. "When I confronted him this morning," I finally went on, "he didn't deny it. He apologized, but he dismissed it. He told me I was overreacting. He said it didn't count because it was just emotional." At that, a flicker of something dark crossed Robert's face. It was the first real crack in his stoic facade. He knew his son. He knew that brand of dismissive justification. "He expected me to forgive him and move on," I finished, my voice barely a whisper. "But I can't. The trust is gone, Robert. It's not a crack that can be patched. The entire foundation is gone." He was silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. I could practically see him replaying years of conversations, of observations, of disappointments in his mind, all of it slotting into this new, terrible context. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes filled with a deep, weary sadness. "Do you have proof?" he asked. It wasn't accusatory. It was the question of a man who needed to see the raw data, who needed to understand the precise nature of the failure. My hand trembled as I retrieved my phone and unlocked it. I had taken screenshots of the most damning exchanges before Leo had a chance to delete them. I opened the gallery and slid the phone across the table to him, just as I had done with Leo's phone that morning. He picked it up and began to read. I watched his face as he scrolled through the images. I saw his jaw tighten further. I saw his knuckles turn white as he gripped the phone. I saw the deep lines around his eyes etch themselves even deeper. He didn't read them all. He didn't need to. After a few minutes, he set the phone down gently on the table. He took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, looking old and tired. "The boy is a fool," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It was more than anger. It was a profound, soul-deep disappointment. "A coward and a fool." He looked at me and his eyes were clear. "You did the right thing, Camilla, asking him to leave. And you did the right thing by telling me. You upheld your end of the bargain. Loyalty, integrity." He said the words like they were sacred tenets. My son, on the other hand, he has broken every rule of honor I ever tried to teach him. He stood up, his decision made. I need to go home and speak with Helen, he said, his voice now regaining its familiar, firm authority. But this is not over. We will be having a family meeting. Tonight, Leo will be there, and I expect you to be there as well. Robert, I don't know if I can. You will be there, he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is not just about him anymore. This is about family. And you, he said, looking me directly in the eye, are family. He walked to the door, and I followed him. He paused with his hand on the knob and turned back to me. I am so sorry, Camilla, he said, and the raw sincerity in his voice broke through my carefully constructed walls. A single tear finally escaped and rolled down my cheek. I am so sorry my son did this to you. And with that, he was gone. I was left alone again in the silence, but this time it was different. It was no longer the silence of shock and grief. It was the quiet, charged air before a lightning strike. The drive to Robert and Helen's house that evening was surreal. The familiar streets of their quiet, tree-lined neighborhood seemed to belong to another lifetime, one that had existed only yesterday. Every fiber of my being wanted to turn the car around and drive away, to handle this privately, to just disappear. But Robert's words echoed in my mind. You are family. It was a command, but it was also a promise. I was showing up not as Leo's accuser, but as a member of this family whose core values had been violated. When I arrived, Robert's truck was in the driveway next to Helen's car. Leo's car was there, too. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. He was already inside. Robert must have been watching for me because the front door opened before I even reached the porch. He stood there, his face grim. He simply nodded at me and stepped aside to let me in. The house was unnervingly quiet. I could see Helen sitting on the living room sofa, her hands twisted in her lap. She looked up as I entered, and her eyes were red-rimmed and full of a mother's heartbreak. She gave me a weak, watery smile that didn't reach her eyes. Leo was standing by the fireplace, his arms crossed defensively. He looked pale and drawn, but when he saw me, a flash of anger crossed his face. He clearly saw this as a setup, a trial where I was the star witness for the prosecution. He had no idea he was the only one on trial. Camilla, Robert said, his voice commanding the room. Please have a seat. He gestured to the armchair opposite the sofa where Helen sat, placing me directly in her line of sight, a clear and deliberate alignment. I sat, my back straight, my hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking. Robert remained standing, positioning himself in the center of the room, a judge addressing his court. Leo, he began, his voice dangerously calm. Camilla has told us what happened. I have seen the messages you sent to that woman. So, before we go any further, I want to hear it from you. Is it true? Leo shot a venomous glare at me before turning to his father. It's been blown way out of proportion, he started, falling back on the same tired script. It was just texting. Dad, it was a mistake, I know, but nothing physical happened. Camilla is being overly dramatic, and she had no right to bring you and Mom into this. This is our business. Robert took a slow, deliberate step towards his son. Our business, he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. You made it my business when you disrespected the woman who is wearing your great-grandmother's locket. You made it my business when you broke your word, a promise you made not just to her, but to this entire family. You made it my business when you proved yourself to be a man of weak character and no integrity. Leo flinched as if he'd been struck. That's not fair. Fair, Robert cut him off, his voice rising for the first time, not in volume but in intensity. Let me tell you what's not fair. It's not fair that this woman, he gestured toward me, a woman who has shown you nothing but loyalty and support, who has managed your life and your finances and your future with more care than you have ever shown, has to sit here today with her heart broken because you were too weak to be a man. He continued, his voice a low, rumbling condemnation. I did not raise a liar, Leo. I did not raise a coward who hides behind excuses. It was just emotional. What a pathetic, flimsy shield to hide behind. The emotional bond is everything. It's the trust, the respect, the very bedrock of a partnership. You took that bedrock and you pulverized it. And for what? So some other woman could flatter your ego. Leo's defensive anger began to crumble, replaced by a desperate, childish panic. He looked toward his mother, his last hope for an ally. "Mom," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Please, talk to him. It was a mistake. I love Camilla. I want to fix this." Helen finally looked at her son, and the raw pain in her expression was devastating. "Oh, Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. How could you do this to her, to us? We love her. We trusted you to take care of her." Her support wasn't for him, it was for me. The realization hit Leo like a physical blow. His parents weren't here to mediate. They were here to pass judgment. His entire strategy, his entire life of being able to charm and wheedle his way out of consequences, had failed him. He turned his anger back on the only target he had left. "This is your fault," he snarled at me, his finger pointing accusingly. "You couldn't just handle this between us. You had to run to Daddy and ruin my life." That was the final straw. Robert's face, which had been filled with angry disappointment, went completely cold. He looked at his son as if he were a stranger. "Her life," he said, his voice now flat and devoid of all emotion. "You're worried about your life? You don't have the first clue what it means to build a life. Camilla does. She builds things that are strong, that are honest, that are meant to last. You just break things." Robert walked over to the fireplace and stood next to his son, but he wasn't looking at him. He was looking at the family photos on the mantel. "This family stands for something. It stands for honesty, for keeping your word, for loyalty. You have disgraced all of it." He finally turned to face Leo, his eyes like chips of ice. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave this house. Your mother and I are deeply disappointed. Until you can understand the gravity of what you've done, not just your betrayal of Camilla, but your betrayal of every value we tried to instill in you, you are no longer welcome here. The financial support we provide, your car, your phone plan, it's all ending. You are on your own." He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. "Until you learn what it means to be a man of integrity, you are no longer a son of this house." Disowned, the word hung in the air, unspoken but absolute. Leo stared at his father. His mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. He looked at his mother, who was now openly weeping into her hands, her shoulders shaking. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a terrifying combination of hatred and disbelief. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the house. A moment later, we heard the squeal of his car's tires as he sped away down the street, leaving a thick, suffocating silence in his wake. I sat there, frozen in the armchair, feeling numb. I had been vindicated, but there was no triumph in it. There was only the quiet, devastating sound of a family breaking apart. In the days that followed, the silence left by Leo's departure was gradually filled by the quiet, steady presence of his parents. The final conversation I had with Leo was short and bitter. He came by the house the next day, accompanied by a friend, to collect the rest of his things. He didn't look at me. He just moved with a grim, furious efficiency, stuffing his life into cardboard boxes. As he was about to leave, he finally turned to me, his face twisted with resentment. "I hope you're happy," he spat. "You didn't just break up with me, you blew up my whole life. You took my family." "I didn't take them, Leo," I replied, my voice weary but firm. They chose the principles they raised you on over the excuses you tried to sell them. Your actions did this, not mine." He just shook his head and walked out the door for the last time, leaving me with nothing but empty rooms and the lingering ghost of a future that would never be. I expected that to be the end of it. I expected Robert and Helen to retreat, to grieve for the son they had effectively lost, and for our relationship to fade into a collection of sad, awkward memories. I was wrong. 2 days after the confrontation, my phone rang. It was Helen. "Camilla, dear," she said, her voice still fragile but warm. "I know this is a difficult time, but Robert and I were wondering, we're having our usual Sunday roast this weekend. We know it's asking a lot, but we would be so honored if you would join us." I was stunned. "Helen, I don't want to intrude." "Nonsense," she insisted gently. "It's just us. It would be good for us, all of us, to have you here." And so, that Sunday, I found myself back at their house, but the atmosphere was completely different. There was no tension, no looming confrontation. There was only a quiet sense of shared loss, but also of shared resolve. We ate at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room. We talked about my work, about Helen's garden, about a book Robert was reading. We didn't mention Leo's name once. It was as if we were all tacitly agreeing to seal that door and focus on what remained. As I was helping Helen clear the plates, Robert came into the kitchen. He poured himself a small glass of whiskey and looked at me, a sad smile on his face. "You know," he said, swirling the amber liquid, "we always used to joke about it." I looked at him confused. "Joke about what?" "That you were our favorite," he said. He looked over at Helen, who nodded in agreement, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We'd say it to get a rise out of Leo, but we knew even then that there was something special about you, your strength, your character. It wasn't a joke, Camilla, not really." He raised his glass in a small toast. "To our favorite," he said, his voice thick with emotion. In that moment, the meaning of the word, family, rearranged itself in my heart. Family wasn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It was about shared values. It was about showing up. It was about choosing to love and support someone not because you had to, but because their character demanded it. In the weeks and months that followed, that quiet Sunday became our new normal. Robert and Helen became my staunchest allies, my most loyal friends. Robert advised me on refinancing the house solely in my name, connecting me with his own lawyer to make sure everything was handled properly. Helen would drop by with soup on days she knew I was working late, or call just to chat. We were building something new from the wreckage, the three of us. A different kind of family, but one whose foundation was, I knew, unshakable. It was built on integrity, strength, and loyalty. I still have the locket Helen gave me. I wear it often. It's no longer a symbol of the family I was marrying into, but a symbol of the family I found. Losing Leo was the most painful experience of my life, but in the process, I discovered what true love and loyalty look like. It looks like a retired teacher who brings you soup when you're sad, and a construction mogul who toasts you with his evening whiskey. It turns out, I didn't lose a family. I just ended up with the best parts of it. I am moving forward, single but not alone, carrying the bittersweet knowledge that in the ultimate test of character, I was the one they chose. For everyone listening, I want to ask, what does family truly mean to you? Is it defined by blood, or by the actions and character of the people you choose to surround yourself with? My experience taught me that sometimes the most solid foundations are the ones you build in the most unexpected places.